Have you ever seen anything or experienced anything that left you with shivers down your spine or left you where you couldn't explain it? With movies like The Poltergeist, Amityville, The Conjuring, and Insidious, many have been introduced to the world of horror, but who has actually really lived it in real life? I have. Before Halloween arrives, I wanted to share with you some of my most terrifying encounters as I've had in the astral world and spirit in general, and also share some spooky stories from haunted experiences that I've lived through growing up as a psychic and with a family who on one side was plagued by ritual abuse and brought on by someone who, like Lorraine and Ed Warren, was into demonology. And through exploring such in the darker side, brought plague and attachment to his family. So you've heard me talk about angels, heaven, and divine light, but today I'm diving into the shadows, into the darker corners of the spirit realm. These are the spookiest things that I have ever seen. So first, let's go into some of the scariest encounters that I've had with the paranormal. Some of these I've seen in live time and others while in astral travel. To understand the creatures, let's first explain the astral world. I just did a video, but I've been to many places beyond 3D, and to complement my recent video on dreams, I want to go into the astral world further and tell you a few stories about beings that I've encountered there. The astral realm is a place where consciousness can travel beyond the physical, exploring different levels or zones of existence. And I know this for sure as I've been there many times. So the non-physical realm, the astral world, is a realm of energy and consciousness not bound by physical laws. With multiple levels of having various layers or levels, each with different characteristics and inhabitants. The astral realm is inhabited by spiritual entities, guides, ancestors, or other beings, and I can most certainly vouch for that in my own experiences. But what I have seen is that it resembles very similar to here, and there are many different places that look very, very different. In this, we go higher and it takes us to the realm of angels, ascended masters. But with that, they are at a higher level above the refined layers of the astral world. So the lower astral world is a darker, more chaotic and dense region of the astral plane. And this area is associated with fear, negativity, lower vibrational entities, as I discussed. And this is a place where disturbed spirits and lost souls linger. It's true. And even in some aspects of the astral world, there is a mystical library or database there where some of the knowledge, events, and memories of the histories are stored, and you can access some truths by visiting there if you really know what you're doing. In some places, there are beautiful, serene environments resembling lush gardens, forests, and waterfalls. And you can encounter these through some of your astral journeys if you know how to direct your spirit body. But in the astral world, there are also darker places where fears, nightmares, and negative energies are concentrated. These realms are very challenging to get through, but there are opportunities for healings for those that can confront those fears, as some of them are manifested of their own, coming from their own subconscious, for the astral world is where anything goes. And this is a rich and complex dimension that spans various levels and places with its own characteristics and inhabitants. It's a realm of exploration, spiritual growth, and connection beyond the physical world as we're going beyond the veil into spirit. And in this, people want to see what's beyond spirit. They want to know what exists beyond the physical world. And the astral world is a mixture of everything and all that goes beyond thought and dreams, in that little space of the spiritual veil just beyond the living. So it started with a family member haunted by a sinister clown. No, not your typical circus performer. This was a scarred old clown, bald with scraggly hair hanging on the sides of his head, his face twisted into a grotesque grin. His eyes were dark and dead, haunted of their dreams, and in the shadows stalking them, there was this presence in the astral plane, malevolent, and sometimes just lurking beyond the veil, watching and waiting, and just wanting to send me some bad energy. And it chilled me to the core, which is one of the reasons why I don't like clowns, because I've actually seen a spiritual being that resembles one, although not with makeup or anything, but just in the facial expressions and in the way that he presented himself. Another spirit that I encountered was a ghoul dressed in an all-black gown with a pointed hat that seemed to kind of stretch all the way upward. The skeletal face was gaunt, hollowed-eyed, and it moved slow, and it was like a predator cloaked in darkness. And nearby a similar figure appeared in a very similar outfit, but its face was covered, and the hat was very tall, very pointed in black, and they were just covered in black, kind of like a Ku Klux Klan outfit, which I don't agree with the Ku Klux Klan whatsoever, but that's what it reminded me of, but in all black, and he was with him, and it seemed that they worked hand in hand. Now, in the woods of the astral realm, when I was traveling, I also saw a white, long-armed monster. It moved with unnatural speed. It was a soul snatcher from the living and the dead alike, and its elongated limbs seemed to stretch beyond normal proportions, reaching into our reality. Its gaze was cold, relentless, and it was a predator of spirits, and I'll go into my experience with that a little further in the video. One of the strangest encounters was with a figure who appeared medieval. It was cloaked in robes and looked centuries old. He didn't seem bad, and he led me to an altar, a place of ritual. He seemed gentle, and although while I was with him, floating around in the astral, and he was leading me to this altar for a ceremony, I could feel these darker entities lurking, and I just knew that there was something not right there, and so I fled. Now, another one that I confronted were wraiths. These are ghastly, white-skinned women with stringy black hair, and they appear in a trio, and they try to suck the very essence of your soul behind a fragment of the astral realm in this icy place. And once they get to you, they just chill you to the bone, and you know what's going on. You know that they're sucking that energy away, and it's very hard to escape them once you get to them. Another time I saw a minotaur. Yes, I know that it sounds a little crazy, but they do exist. And he appeared in my bedroom one night. Its towering form, horns curling like ancient iron, and staring at me with eyes filled with primal rage. It was hot and foul, and it just prowled at the threshold of my reality, right beyond dream, a legend that I never had seen before there, but now I knew existed and was very much alive as an astral resident. Shadow beings, which I've mentioned many times before, are elusive dark figures, and they try to grab me as I hovered above them, and they haunted a neighborhood there in the astral world where they were seen in a area that resembled like my neighborhood, but that which was on fire, and they kept trying to just kind of grab me and pull me down as I was trying to escape them. Another time was in an underground sewage tunnel in the astral world in my neighborhood. I was actually there in my neighborhood on the other side in spirit, and it looked like there were some children down there in modern clothes, some in old, and they were gathered around whispering some very mysterious things. Many had died in car accidents, overdoses over the years, and some earlier in an asylum that actually exists nearby. It seemed that they were caught somewhere in astral world in limbo. So I first moved into my house, and the moment an out-of-body experience happened, I actually floated across town. I saw this water tower that I never even knew existed there. And the next day, my daughter and I went walking to see if we could confirm that it was indeed real, and we ended up finding, that place of sewer, and then we seen the cemetery where some of the asylum victims had been buried, and so we knew in fact that what I had seen in spirit was true, and that these were spirits trying to communicate with me on the other side. One night I also floated outside of my room, and I was taken to another time and place, a strange neighborhood surrounded by a black iron fence, and there I met this other dimensional girl. She looked human, but she had 2 bumps on her head as if she were trying to grow horns. Her eyes flickered with this alien intelligence, and I felt an overwhelming sense of unease. It was so dark, and it just put shocks in my heart that I immediately wanted to get out of there. In another visit, I encountered a being of pure blue energy. He was sitting in my room as I came out of body, trailing plasma from the back of his head. He was watching me while I had gone down into OBE, and he seemed a little protective but terrifying, and I was afraid that he might do something to my body, and so I kind of led him away in the spirit world to get him away from where I was physically while I was in spirit form. Now, the darkest encounter that I had was with a beast man. It was a demon wielding a sledgehammer, brutal and feral, and he was accompanied by a short man dressed as a priest, taunting the sacred name of God. And I was so afraid as I seen him, and I just shouted God's name in Hebrew, and I slammed back into my body, and I knew that the Lord's protection had saved me once again. So these are just some of the terrifying creatures that I've experienced in the astral realm. I've helped in showing some pictures and why they're so scary, because these are the shadows that lurk just beyond perception, waiting in the darkness. And as Halloween approaches, remember, some spirits are best left undisturbed. With that, I would like to go into some of the spookier experiences that I have had while growing up in real life time, since these were just stories that I've experienced while on the other side. And even though they're very real, you know, these are in spirit form. It's when you cross over into the veil. And while I've seen such a large variety of different entities and spirits, and some even more scarier, these were the ones that really scared me, because it seemed like they were attacking me directly. Some of them right there as I left the body, and unexpected. And a lot of them that I knew had bad intentions. And so my trust was lacking, and I felt a very great need to protect myself. But these were just a few examples of some of the residents that exist over there in the darker side of the astral realm itself. But like I said, the astral world has many places. We live in this reality complex. There are good places in the astral world. Some are created by your own mind. Some are created by the mind of others. Everything goes here, you know, things that you focus on, memories, subconscious stuff, dreams, everything exists. They're all intertwined in this place that is void of time, as it creates these like little realms where your spirit travels. And sometimes you may even travel into your own dream, or travel into the dreams of others, where they all kind of overlap and crisscross. And so with the movie Insidious, I'd have to say that Insidious was probably the most accurate depiction of what the spirit world looks like when you first astral travel and get over there on the other side. But once you learn how to direct your spirit body, you can go just about anywhere. You can even go back into the past and into other dreams. So let's talk about some of those scary experiences that I had while growing up. So as a little girl, I grew up in a home which was very, very haunted. It was built in the late 1800s, and my aunt lived across the street, and her home was built around the same time. It was mainly just all farmland when the two houses were built. Now, both of my mom and my aunt each had grown up in a family where their father was into demonology, and they had spoken about seeing things growing up all of their lives, from having seen some spooky pictures of ghosts that he had taken, some creepy recordings out at cemeteries, and even having seen shadow people themselves while they were awake in bed. And so that's how I know that it's not just a part of sleep paralysis. But with that, growing up, we experienced a lot of things. There were a lot of footsteps that we heard running up and down the stairs. There were always different types of spirits that would pop up. Sometimes I'd be in bed sleeping, and I would see a man standing in my doorway just kind of watching me, where I'd have to hide underneath the covers. There were times also where I would go spend time at my cousin's house, and we'd be playing a simple game of Uno, and all of a sudden you would see a dark shadow go by, and my cousin would be lifted up in midair and thrown into a bookcase. And they often cried about seeing these shadowy figures as well too. And so with our families being so close and living, you know, within that close proximity, you know, there was always stories that were going on back and forth between the two houses. And for sure, you know, I experienced a lot of scary things too. Once I was laying on the couch just trying to take a little bit of a nap, you know, not fall asleep or anything, but just kind of rest my eyes from the day. And as I was closing my eyes and meditating, I just kind of had this intuition that there was an energy there, that there was somebody else there. And when I looked over, there was a man kneeling beside me while I was resting. And the funny part about it was that he looked more modernized, like I've described some of these other beings, like the ones that I seen down in the hidden sewer by the old asylum, which is called Lakeland around here. That was an asylum that was built many, many years ago. And when my neighborhood was just all woods, they would build these little madhouses that were more like sheds, that were kind of like prisons for the people that were considered to have mental disabilities. And they lined all over this creek, which we call Timber Creek, all the way up into the main hospital. And so a lot of people that pass away, they'd be buried just randomly anywhere. And then there was an old alms cemetery for some of them as well too. And I ended up finding that, but seeing some of those spirits underground like that, where those sewers were in my astral experience, I seen that they were a mix of different time frames. And so that told me that these were spirits that had died in the past, some that had died recently, kind of just mixing together because they were lost. And that's probably why my astral body was called in that direction to help them. But back when I lived in my old house, this entity that I opened my eyes and seen sitting next to me, he looked very modern, and I was very curious as to why someone like that would have latched on to me at the time, because I hadn't been anywhere, that would have attracted them. There wasn't anybody in the home that had died at that age or during modern times. There was a couple of older figures that had died in the house many, many years before we even moved in from the original owners. And so it was startling, just to look and see someone sitting there like in the physical form. And this wasn't the first time that I had seen spirits. I see spirits walking around like physically, like I do regular people. And sometimes it's very hard for me to differentiate between the living and the dead. And that's when I have to kind of like look further and take a deeper look and to see what's going on, and what I'm actually viewing. And in that moment, I looked. At first I thought it was an intruder because it looked so real and so physical, as many of the spirits do. And then I realized, this was someone that was in spirit form and just had manifested in that physical way, sitting there in front of me without reason, without any announcement, with no communication. So I just kind of froze, paralyzed in fright, because normally they'll communicate if they're there for something good. And so finally I just scrambled up and they faded. And I remember just being really afraid, to lay on the sofa by myself until I blessed the area and put protection around it, and then everything was fine. Another time I was sitting on my couch there growing up in that house, and I was just watching, a little bit of TV, but I had turned the TV out to listen to some music. I was really big into opera music and classical at the time, and I was just sitting there listening, meditating. And I looked at the television, and we had, a staircase that went upward, and our couch was right up against it. And I could see these faces in the spokes of the staircase, and they were like ghoulish white with red eyes, and then they had like a white cape over top of them, very small in build. And that really startled me as well too, because there were about 5 of them fitting one into each of the spokes. And I knew I wasn't seeing anything because I was like looking very clearly into the television. The television had a very clear reflection, and I knew, there was nothing that could have been there that had red eyes or pale face with, a veil over top of them like that. And so after, getting up enough nerve and getting over my fear, I just started to pray in Hebrew and ask for the angels' help, and then they disappeared. But that was definitely very scary. Spirits can manifest in a physical way. I remembered one time growing up, my brother, usually stayed out late. He was a firefighter, and my mother and I had, getting ready for bed. And I never went to sleep. I was always up because I would always see spirits. I would always hear things that were going on in the house, even when my parents were asleep. And so it was very hard for me to sleep, especially with seeing things walking down my hallway or hearing the footsteps in the hall. Sometimes hearing footsteps up in the attic, or seeing someone standing in the door. Sometimes feeling someone grab my foot, or even like tug at my arm, or even caress my hair. And so I would just hide under the covers. But the one night my mother had come out of her bedroom, And I could hear her talking, and she was saying something, you know, to my brother as she stood at the top of the stairs, and it was a very tall, narrow staircase, and she just yelled down, "Hey, what's going on down there? You're in, make sure you lock up." And she froze because my brother would have responded, but he didn't. He just froze in his position, wasn't looking up at her, just kind of stood there. And she got spooked out, and so she just thought, well, maybe, you know, he drank, or, you know, maybe there was something wrong, or maybe he didn't want to get in trouble coming in so late, because my father, even though he's an adult, you know, always asked him to be in before 12 to lock up, because my father was very meticulous about that, being in the Army, wanting to keep the house locked down and safe. And so she just went to use the restroom, came back out, and he was gone. But she never heard him come upstairs. She never seen him go to his room, so she just walked down the stairs, looked around, he wasn't there. She starts going up the stairs and turns around and looks, and the door was locked. And it had the chain on the inside and everything, and all of a sudden she hears about 5 minutes going up the steps, because she's going really slow, she's creeped out, and she hears this knocking, and it's my brother, and he's saying, "I can't get in, you got the chain on." And she said, "Weren't you just in here?" And he goes, "No, I just pulled up a couple minutes ago." So my mom was really spooked out, and I was too, because I was sitting there listening to all of it, and I was wondering, wow, you know, what power this entity must have to manifest in a physical form to look just like my brother. And this wasn't the first time that something like that had happened either. You know, years later, we moved into the house in Lindenwold, and I was upstairs, you know, washing my face and doing my cosmetic, hygienic routine, you know, my beauty regimen. And I kept the bathroom door open, and, you know, the stairs were like right there. And I looked down and I see my dad holding the railing and looking up with this crazed look on his face. And he had on like this red shirt with this weird flannel. And I said, "Dad, are you okay? Why are you looking at me like that?" And he just didn't move. He just stared. This big grin on his face. It's so crazy. I can't even like reenact it. And like shivers went down my spine. And I just, you know, rinsed my face off, went to get the towel, and I looked back because I was going to confront him again, but it was gone. And so I said, "Dad, you know, what's going on?" And he goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "Where you at?" He's like, "I'm watching TV. What's wrong with you?" And I said, "Weren't you just on the stairs?" He says, "No." So I ran down the stairs, you know, and took one look at him, and he was sitting there with his black t-shirt, black sweatpants. He didn't have no time to change. You know, his room was upstairs past the bathroom. I would have seen him walk by. He'd been sitting on the couch the whole time, but yet something manifested to look just like him, appearing on the stairs, just watching what I was doing. And it was so clear. I must have stared at this replica of my father in spirit with this crazed look on its face for like a good 2 minutes, like dead on, making eye contact with it, thinking, why is my father looking at me like this? Like, what's going on? Is he okay? But it wasn't my father at all. And then later on, having had that happen with my son Noah too. And so when he was about 5 years old, we had a couple of friends stay over, and Noah had gone to sleep in his room, and he was only just across the hall. And we were watching a movie, and all of a sudden we see Noah like walk past in the hallway super quick, and we both look, me and my friend, and we're like, what's he doing up? And you know, the spirit that looked like Noah, which we thought was Noah, had gone toward the steps, and there was nowhere else to go except for back this way or down the stairs. And so when we got up, we went straight to the room, which was right there, and we see Noah was sleeping. So who was that walked right past us down toward the stairs? And that was, you know, pretty shocking for my friend, because she knew that I was a psychic. She knew that I dealt with these types of things like all of my life, even though this is just a small number of encounters. But for her to see that, you know, she was pretty scared, and she wanted to leave and go home. And then, you know, we seen a little boy. Me and Amber were laying on our bed. We shared a room at one time, and we had the TV on, and we were just watching, you know, some innocent stuff. We were watching, you know, a couple of cartoons, and the TV just kind of went into static, and it made this very strange, weird blue glowing light. And in that light, right in front of our very eyes, a little boy with blonde hair, icy blue eyes, and pajamas just manifested in front of us out of nowhere. And we just looked at him. He didn't seem to be very harmful, but it was still, you know, a little scary to say the least. And then he disappeared, and all of a sudden, Noah's toys, which were in a bucket right next to us and some on the floor, started all going off at the same time. Now, I want to go back to the creature that I spoke of that was white with the very long arms and seemed to be, you know, in the astral world, but we actually seen him in my backyard once, where Amber and I were looking out the window, just stargazing, as we used to look for shooting stars and make wishes for everybody around that same period of time. Must have been like maybe around 2015. And we look down and we see this crouching entity that was like all white. It had very red eyes and very long arms, very long legs, just kind of crouching. And all of a sudden it just started going at super speed, running on all fours toward the house where we were looking down at it. So we hurried up and shut the blinds, locked the windows, and we started praying, and we were fine. Another spooky encounter was when my father had gone to West Virginia, and he was visiting with his father at the time, left me, Amber, and Noah back at the house. And all of a sudden, Amber and I were just kind of laying down, and we hear, yo. And my father, you know, always said, yo. So we thought my dad was home, so we both jumped up, and she was like, did you hear Pop Pop? And I said, yeah, I heard Dad. And she's like, they must be home. So we went downstairs, we're looking, no one's there. My father had parked his truck in the driveway just to make it look like someone was home, so that anybody wouldn't notice that the car was gone. And we seen that, you know, his truck was still there, because if he had arrived, he would have moved it and put my mom's car there instead. And so I opened up the front door just to, you know, make sure they weren't parked on the street. And there was a man, you know, in a hoodie, leaning up against my dad's truck, looking right at the front door. And I was so afraid, because I knew this was paranormal. It had that vibe, and like I say, they do like manifest in physical nature to look physical, and I just knew by the vibe of it that it wasn't. And so I ended up shutting the door, but I couldn't get the door closed fast enough, and we just kind of slid down the wall and hid. And then I looked to make sure it was gone, and then once I seen that it was, I went outside and looked down the street to see if anyone was walking, and it was certainly, there was nobody there. So that scared me. And then as soon as we went back into the house, we went into the kitchen, and we seen like the kitchen was trashed. There was stuff falling out of the cabinets. My son's lunchbox was tipped over, and all of the cabinet doors were open, and we were just like, whoa, this is crazy. Something got in here. It must have something to do with the entity, the man that we seen outside, and that it used my father's voice, you know, to get our attention was really scary too. So we ended up calling my dad, confirming he was still out there. We told him what happened, and he told us to just pray, and so we did, as I already knew to do. And we ended up sleeping with like a whole circle of Bibles around us that night, because it was pretty terrifying. Another encounter that I can share is that one time my son had his friend stay overnight, and they were sleeping on the downstairs sofa. Whenever they had friends over, we all just kind of slept in the same room. You know, I'm innocent and very childlike myself, so their friends liked hanging out with me too. And his friend just felt something kind of reach over the side of the couch and grab him, and he gasped. And when I looked over, I could see like this very hairy, very furry arm touching him, and I said, oh my gosh. And he looked over too, and he seen it, and he goes, oh my God, it looked like the arm of a monkey. And so he hurried up and jumped away. And when he looked, he could see like this furry creature that looked very monkey-like, kind of running on all fours, and then just disappear in thin air. And so he was really afraid of that as well, and called his mom and explained what happened. We even tried to get some pictures to see if there was any residual energy in the environment from that, but unfortunately there wasn't. Now, with all of the encounters that I have had, you know, these ones were the scariest to me because they caught me off guard and sometimes looked so real. Like one time I was here by myself and somebody was just knocking on the door, and my little ones, Adriel and Alex, they heard it. And they were like, Mommy, somebody's at the door. And I'm thinking, well, who would be at the door? Nobody ever knocks on the door. And so I went down, opened the door, and I look, and there's nobody there. And I'm looking down the street, there's nobody there. So I lock up, I come back up and 2 seconds later, I'm not even up the steps. I only climbed 2 steps away from the door, and I hear the knock again. So I'm like, aha, if there's somebody there, as soon as I open up this door, they're going to get caught. But there was nobody there. And the same thing happened every single day of the week for a good couple of months. And so I called it the knocker. And it was really funny because I went on Google Maps, and one time when I was kind of looking at my house from the front, there was an angle that Google Maps had caught of my front door where you can actually see the face of a man, very well defined, with dark hair, black eyes, just kind of standing in the door on the inside of the door. It wasn't a reflection. And that made me think, could that be the spirit that's kind of dwelling there? Because when my father was still alive when we first moved in, he often said that he could see over the railing from the bi-level down into the foyer that there was someone standing there, and it kind of spooked him out. He never did really like living, in this house. Another time I had a friend stay over, and this was like an encounter that we all had. The lights went out from the power, and there was thunder, there was lightning, and I was outside on the back deck, but my friend didn't know it, and so they're just kind of standing at the top of the steps looking down, thinking that I was downstairs, and all of a sudden this shadowy figure that looks like it could have been me in the dark, it had my silhouette, my profile, went by super quick from my room into the kids' room, and they're like, Allie, and all of a sudden I came in from the back deck, and I'm like, why are you calling me? I'm over here. And they were like, oh my God, I just swear I seen something that looked just like you that walked across the downstairs. And so I went over there and I just waited, and I seen it myself too. It came back from the other direction into the room really quick. And I can't say that it really resembled me, but I could see how they would have gotten that. But it was long haired. You could see the hair in that apparition. You could see that it did have a very similar profile, but it was all black, and it went by so quick during the storm that we just left. We didn't want to have to mess with that until I could come back when the lights were on, do a healing, do a blessing, do a spirit removal in the home, which is what I have to do every single time something crazy pops up here. I won't mess with having spirits around. I don't like them. They cause problems. They try to cause division. They try to cause arguments, bad luck, disruption, and they will latch on to people very, very quickly, and they love to play games, especially these darker entities. And so I always do protection grids and clearings in my home every single week. I do angelic infusions to fill this environment with a wonderful sense of divine light to keep those types of things out. And if something does slip in, I'm ready to fight it off, but I have to do so, under the right conditions. But those are some of the scariest things that have happened. We've even once seen an old friend of mine that we hadn't heard from for a very long time walk through the front door, come down the stairs, walk to the bathroom, and then we're like, we haven't seen them in forever. How did they get here? But it wasn't even them. They just vanished. One other time that I can share with you is that I did see this really scary thing that had happened with my father after he had passed away, and this will be the last one that I share. I have so many, I could go on and on and on. There are so many different entities and creatures that I've seen of all different types, ranks, and levels, but these are the ones that I think really stood out to me because it involved other people, other witnesses, and there's nothing like having a witness when there's a haunting or poltergeist activity, because most of the time people dismiss it and they don't believe in it, So when my father passed away, I had a balloon for little Adriel, and this balloon was downstairs in my office, and it was already out of helium and air. Like, it could barely float. It was touching the ground. There was no breeze blowing, and my door was cracked about this much, and so the balloon was like this big. It couldn't have even fit. And so it floated out of the room and was like being walked up the stairs, came up the second set of stairs, and then made its way down the hallway to my mother's room. And I said to myself, there's no way that balloon didn't just float across the hall into the kids' room downstairs. Scientifically, it's impossible. There's no breeze blowing it. And even if it did and it got up that first level of stairs, it certainly wouldn't have made it to the second level, because it would have been blown against the wall or the door. There was something like literally marching it up the stairs and down the hall to my mom's room. And so I said, hello there, if you can hear me, bring the balloon back. And all of a sudden, the balloon turned around to face us with like the actual face of the character on the balloon, and it was up way higher, like higher than it should have been with the helium, because downstairs it was like touching the ground, but here it's like all the way up. And it turns towards us and starts walking back down the hall towards us and stops, and then turned back around and went back to my mother's room, into her room, and sat down with her in her bed. And that was really spooky because something was definitely attached to that balloon. I could see the energy. It wasn't really revealing itself to me, but for some reason it wanted that balloon to end up next to her, so she would wake up and see it and be like, what is this doing here? And somehow make her think. And so a few of my family members thought it might have been my father trying to communicate very faintly on the other side to let everybody know that he was still here and make it to my mom's room. But I didn't see the energetic blueprint. It was so faint at the time. But he managed, even with that very, very low energy, to get that balloon up there to show us that he was here for just that brief moment, and to put the balloon where he wanted it, to get her to see, you know, that he hadn't fully left yet. And after that, we hadn't had any other encounters with my father for a little while, up until recently, because my son was born. So with that, those are some spooky encounters. We've had a lot of them growing up in the different homes, and, you know, even no matter where we go, I could even go to a store, drive down the street, and see things. I see them everywhere all the time. But these ones definitely were very spooky, and I hope that you've enjoyed hearing about them. Happy Samhain. The veil is very thin at this time. And if you have any spooky, scary stories that you want to share, drop some information in the comments below. I'd love to hear some and share them with us. Thank you for watching, and don't forget, subscribe and turn those notifications on for more future content. Bye-bye.